so you started a supremacy game and you have absolutely no idea what you're doing. No worries, I got you. And we will have a look at all the things you need to know. The first thing we want to do when we load into a game is to make recruitment offices in all of our territories. And just recruitment office, very basic. We can also do like, select all of them at the same time, at least I guess on PC with shift and do that. So recruitment offices make the basic infantry. There's a big difference in this game between the free infantry you generate and the units that you actually build. Recruitment offices doesn't do anything for building units manually, but produces basic infantry for free automatically. So that's really nice. And immediately after this, the game already becomes a little bit more tricky. Because you see, in Supremacy, we have singular production provinces and double production provinces. Here we have 2 grain and here we have 1 grain. And in this province we get double the production in terms of resources, but we also have double the production in terms of units that we build. So that means, apart from the recruitment offices and maybe fortresses, you basically want to make all the buildings that either increase resource production or produce units in these double production provinces if we can. And every country has 2 double production provinces like this. As France, we have a double iron and a double grain. So these are both good early game resources. So what I'm gonna do right now is make a workshop in both of these provinces. This only takes a little bit. Immediately make a level 2 workshop. And immediately after, we can already produce some units. In this case, we can just make 2 armored cars. So right now we made 2 level 2 workshops and we make an armored car from both of them. Now armored cars are heavy in iron, and iron is a very useful early game resource. So a big reason why we can do this is because we have the double iron here. This roughly shows what the opening build should be depending on your starting resources. And we can clearly see that if we have a lot of food and if we have a lot of materials, we can actually pump out units from 2 level 2 workshops. Also, whenever we have a lot of materials, we can make mostly armored cars, and whenever we have mostly food, we can make a lot of cavalry. Both armored cars and cavalry are useful. Cavalry is more offensive, armored car is more defensive, but they're both good for conquering AI. But in a lot of these other situations with some energy resources, I would recommend only making 1 level 2 workshop at the start, only producing units 1 at a time, and saving most of the resources so we can get out a few economy buildings on the resources we need, and that should allow us to stabilize. And this brings us to resources. And it is very interesting that in Supremacy we have a thing with negative resources. Now one of the first things you want to do is basically just to balance out the negatives, because you can. But you're gonna be in a situation where with some of the materials, some of the resources, you cannot do that. We're just negative. Like no matter how I arrange it, we're always gonna be net negative, right? There's no way to fix that. And in our case here as France, it's really not that big of a deal because energy is not that useful of a resource early game anyways. Iron, for example, is a lot more useful in early game because we can make armored cars. But of course, you might be wondering now, what does this mean that we have minus energy? It is important in this game that we are not gonna reach 0. The moment you reach 0 on a resource and you make minus of that resource, you're gonna start ruining your economy. So it's important to not do that, because in this game you can actually get into a death spiral where you don't have a resource and that ruins your economy and you gain less resources, so you get even in a worse situation. It's a death spiral. Luckily for us, a big reason why right now we have these big red numbers is because all of our provinces start at 70 morale, which means they only produce around 70% of their maximum resources. Not exactly, but roughly. And every day that passes, or in case we take capitals, this is gonna go up until 100, at least at the start. So our resources are gonna improve with time. We only have 1 coal here, which means even if all of our provinces are 100%, we should be minus in energy. But this is not a big deal because there are 2 ways to solve this problem, of course. We can either go out and capture, other territories that give us energy, or we can go to the stock market. And at the stock market, we can buy a lot of these coal and energy resources for fairly cheap. I think the stock market is pretty straightforward. Sometimes you can even do arbitrage here. But yeah. All right, let's use our units. We already see that Germany is coming here, wanting to attack us. So let's just pull some units here as a deterrent. We can also group our units somewhere else, probably maybe to Switzerland. And this brings us to another point, which is stacking up units. How the combat system in Supremacy works is that we have around a stack limit of 50. So that means that in a battle, up to 50 units can attack. If you combine units together on one spot, up to 50 units will add their attack damage in a battle with another stack. And you always want to group up your units in one stack. Under no circumstance do you want to send in a bunch of small armies into another big army. That's just not how the game works. They will all end up fighting their own individual battles against a huge army with huge defensive stats, and you will trade insanely badly, so don't do that. And by the way, this is a speed round that I joined right now. All of the numbers per hour are 4 times higher, which does make it a little bit weird, but yeah. Just that's the reason. Usually it should be a fraction of this. So now basically the only thing that is left to do on day 1 is to do heroes basically. And this brings us to heroes, and heroes is a very controversial topic because they're very OP, they're very pay to win, and they're extremely powerful. And we already see that, for example, this Germany deployed a level 10 hero on our border. If he has one level 10 hero, that means he's gonna have most likely all level 10 heroes, and at that point you cannot play the game and we're just gonna quit the game. At this point we can go here, we can click here on send to archived games, and now it's like we never joined the game, and this is how we win at Supremacy 1914. But I mean, like, how can you make a serious guide if this is the nature of the game, right? I was about to end the video here because there's no way to beat this, right? Heroes are too powerful in Supremacy. It's just pain and suffering to fight high-level heroes with no or low-level heroes. But if you're here, you probably want to play Supremacy, so I'm gonna give it another try. So what I would do at this point here is build a fortress, because this guy clearly wants to attack us. And the reason why he wants to attack us is because we have a double iron here, and Germany has no iron. So basically, Germany needs to attack this, or he dies. Let's assume that everybody has the same shitty heroes as I do, which does occur in like 1 out of 3 games, or maybe 1 out of 2 games. You can have at least an early game without facing level heroes. Yeah. Now the economy in Supremacy is pretty interesting, because on day 1 we cannot actually make any buildings for economy. So we unlock our harbors on day 2 and our railways on day 3. And these buildings we only want to basically make in our double production provinces. First in our double production provinces, unless we have like 2 energies, and then maybe in like a coast or something, or somewhere where it's really safe and we know that we're not going to lose it. It's going to take quite a long time for it to pay back, but Supremacy is a very slow-paced game, at least if you're not playing a speed round. But you don't want to make like just armored cars, right? Right now, because we made like 2 armored cars and we already had to invest into a fort here, we're already super low on iron, and iron is very, very useful. So we would probably want to make at least a harbor here on day 2 in Bordeaux to give us a lot of more grain. And then we can make barracks here. We can already make the barracks here now. And then mostly we're just gonna make cavalry from this province. And then we can probably just pump out a bunch of cavalry from one province. And we're probably not gonna have a bunch of iron for armored cars, but as soon as we can, we probably also want to make like 2 railways. 1 railway in Bordeaux and 1 railway in Nancy. And so probably, and the harbor is gonna take quite a long time to complete. So we're probably first gonna make a harbor on day 2 in Bordeaux, then a railway on day 3 in Nancy, and that's probably already everything we can afford. And we're also gonna make a bunch of cavalry from like this level 2 workshop, level 1 barracks here. And what I would do after that is basically use the stock market a lot. You see already this is very cheap iron we can buy. The stock market is extremely useful in these types of game. For some reason, basically nobody seems to care about the stock market. It's crazy OP. It makes a huge difference. Whenever there's a good order on materials, buy the materials. And here, because we're now negative on energy still, I would buy the cheap coal, maybe the cheap oil. And yeah, I think it's about getting a good balance, right? You kind of want to industrialize. Whenever you basically have a double production province, you almost always just want to industrialize it with harbors, with railways. And then after it, there comes the factories. The factories only are available on day 6, and factories are the thing that really gets you the big juicy units. So they unlock artillery and cruisers, and then here, once you get more levels of the factories, you then get to the tanks and stuff. And then there are a few other things that are really important to know. So all the units here regenerate HP on day change based on the morale of the province that they are in. So all the provinces started on 70%, so all the units also are 70% HP. You want to avoid having your units in enemy territory or allied territory on day change. Ideally, they would be in these high morale provinces on day change. So that means sometimes you want to basically make a little expedition into enemy territory, capture it, and then retreat back into your territory before this timer here on the bottom resets, right? And then you basically have the regeneration tick, and then you want to venture out again. Because if you are like on enemy territory, it's the equivalent of being on a 25% province. So that means your units will not just not regenerate, they will lose HP, which is really, really bad. So this makes the difference, a huge difference, and the guy who pays attention to this will have like a twice stronger army than the guy who just doesn't know about it. Fortresses in Supremacy are really, really strong. They give like a 30% buff, 30% in level 1, and then 15 for every additional level. They also boost morale. It's really, really strong, right? And in Supremacy, artillery only comes out a bunch of days later, and even then it's low damage. One artillery doesn't really do all that much unless you're like in a position where you can shoot at the enemy fortress from your own fortress. Then it's a little bit more annoying because you can't even counter it. But yeah, fortresses in these situations are really, really strong. If I get my fortress up, it's really hard for him to push this stuff unless he outflanks me and goes here. He can still outflank me by going through Belgium or Switzerland. That's of course a possibility. You can of course join a coalition. In Supremacy, it's I think okay to join a coalition, get some allies, do some team play. Espionage is not really needed, and this just gives you a nice overview of what's going on. Very convenient, especially once you get a little bit bigger. But yeah, I mean, then you just want to basically make a nice plan and try to expand. France is like a typically worst situation as a country like that. You basically need allies as France, else you're just gonna be in a really tough spot, right? And Germany, as I already said, Germany kind of wants to go for this. Germany has no materials at the start. Germany is basically the worst starting country because it has 2 double energy resources, and you can't really do anything with energy resources, right? With materials, which is wood and iron, you can build a bunch of these economy buildings on day 2 and 3 and onwards, then factories, you can make armored cars, and with food you can at least make cavalry. With energy you can't really do anything. It's mostly later to do like railway upkeep with coal. Good units require oil and planes require gas. Of course, there are a bunch of different units. There are the ridiculously OP stormtroopers. They have huge attack damage, basically not counterable. in the mid game. Early game you can counter it with armored cars and outmass them. Late game you can match them with heavy tanks and light tanks. In the mid game I don't think you can counter them, but it is what it is. And then artillery is very niche. Again, if you have situations where you are on a fortress province and the enemy fortress is close to you, so you can actually shoot it from your own fortress, then I think artillery is decent. In any other situation, I would probably say don't make it. Just, you know, make a bunch of light tanks, and late game you probably just want to mass heavy tanks anyways. You probably want to make cavalry the whole game. Food is not that useful. There's limited uses for food. Basically, there's only two ways you can spend your food. Either you make like level 2 barracks, which means that your infantry is gonna get pumped out like a fourth of the time, so you mass a bunch of infantry, or you just make cavalry. I guess the consensus is that cavalry is a little bit better than just making infantry, so yeah. However, all of these buildings usually have upkeep, so if you have, for example, a level 1 barracks, it's gonna reduce the amount of time that the infantry takes to produce, but it's gonna have the same amount of upkeep, like this building has upkeep, but the amount of efficiency you get from a level 2 barracks with the amount of time it reduces on the infantry is a lot higher, but the upkeep is the same. So if you have a level 1 barracks to allow you to make cavalry, because you need a barracks to make cavalry. Right now I couldn't make cavalry yet, and you are not producing cavalry at the moment, you actually want to go here and click the disable, so you're not wasting resources on building infantry inefficiently. Another thing that is very useful to know, next to like the huge generation thing, is that, yeah, you know, even not just the buildings have upkeep, but also just the provinces. So an empty province has here on daily production a bunch of upkeep. It says here daily consumption and then a bunch of different resources. And this whole thing is why we have in the top line so much energy deficits. And basically the point where it reaches a break even, where your province generates more resources than it consumes, is at 75% morale. So right now the only reason why we are in plus here is the double production provinces, because they consume the same amount of resources but generate double. But yeah, so basically this iron here is losing us resources. Now the defender's advantage is quite significant in Supremacy 1914. If we check out the infantry stats, they have quite a bit more in defense than attack. And there's also the fortresses, of course, that give the 30% buff. They're also very significant. Also, units in enemy territory only travel a third of the speed. So that's right now why he's not really attacking, because these units are gonna reach here before he reaches here, right? If you want to expand these like groups of 10 units, you can. You probably want to at least combine similar to what he's doing right here, like 40, 50 units or more. You can conquer these small nations. It's not a big deal if you lose a few infantry. It's basically not avoidable. You don't want to go too aggressive. You kind of want to find a nice balance. Often, of course, Supremacy, just like Call of War, is a game where there's a lot of inactives. So it's worth checking out these players and see their profiles. I mean, this guy and Germany, they have decent profiles, so they are not super likely to be inactive. But in case you find somebody who has a lot of joint games, like this guy is probably either bad or inactive. So it might actually be more useful to attack this guy, because we're gonna get a lot of territory from him. And of course, you also want to think about resources. Right now as France, we don't have any oil, and oil is gonna be a problem later. Now, for example, Italy would be a good target to attack here, because we could have a double coal here. There's some gas here, and there's also an oil down here. So, you know, conquering Italy as France sounds like a reasonable idea. Also, like conquering Germany as France,
1
is reasonable. There's the same situation here, a bunch of energy. That's kind of what we're lacking as France. But you know, everything is good in this situation because we do need energy, because we like energy, but actually energy is the least important. We're not that much in a hurry. But yeah, this game is really country dependent. If you guys know me from Call of War, in Call of War it basically doesn't matter which country you take. There's a very small difference between the best country and the worst country, and all the resources are fairly equally useful. In Supremacy it's really different. Like the Germany start with double coal is insanely bad. It only works if you have high level heroes, and this guy has high level heroes, which means he doesn't need to produce things like armored cars. He can keep his resources and just industrialize. And yeah, so yeah, there is a difference between like unit production and infantry production, right? So if you go into recruitment offices, it says here recruitment plus 100%, that's the free infantry. If you go on the workshop, it says unit production speed. So unit production are actually the things we manually produce, and recruitment speed is the free infantry. So barracks increases the speed that the free infantry gets generated, but it's not that cool because it requires upkeep, so it's not actually free. And that's basically, I think, everything there is to say on day one. So right now the game plan would probably be to just message Germany, make an alliance, make sure he doesn't outflank me through Belgium and Switzerland. Again, there's not that much to do actually here. Until like day 2, day 3, we cannot even spend our resources. So in Call of War, for example, you should basically spend all the resources continuously. If you have a bunch of resources left over at the end of day 1, in Call of War, you're probably doing something wrong. There's a lot of opportunity cost. In Supremacy, it's a little bit different. Basically, like on day 3, you can start spending your resources on like railways. At that point, you do have an opportunity cost, but yeah. So, and again, like my advice is still, the more often you check the stock market, the better. Like, it's such a big advantage. Like, these really cheap materials go an extremely long way, right? Having like an additional 15-20k of materials during the first few days, that's the difference between having a good game and a bad game, I think. And I mean, for heroes, I don't really like covering heroes. So at the start of the game, of course, there's Hank. He doesn't do a lot. You can get him on day 1. Then there's Aardvark, who is basically, he makes trenches, but trenches are not that great. Usually you just want to make fortresses. Trenches also take too long to build. Then Tatiana, day 5 is really annoying. Mev, not really that useful. So right now he's attacking, and this is not good. Well, first he will not win this battle. Once these units are here, my units should trade better than his. And Supremacy is really limited in the way you can outplay people, right? In Call of War, the skill gap and the way you can use skill to outplay your opponent is a lot higher. In Supremacy, right, you can't really do much apart from like standing there. But it's a stat game at the end of the day to a big extent, and you know, stat games are gonna be won by these heroes a lot of the time. I mean, if you enjoyed this, you can subscribe, even though this is pretty sure the last Supremacy video I will ever make. So yeah. And this guy is just mad that he's taking this fight. He should not take this. This is crazy. And of course he lost because infantry has higher defensive stats, and I also was standing on a fort.